So let's start creating things. I'm going to create a particle group. The idea here is to use particle systems that allows you to create a huge number of sound sources if you want. So let's create 100 particles. I could eventually create more particles, less particles. I'm going to pick up some audio files, because these audio files, the material that will be reproduced by the particle. So each particle will randomly select one of these audio files to reproduce on the virtual space. Of course, if you select a single audio file, that means that all particles are going to reproduce exactly the same thing. Of course, I could eventually increase the number of particles, decrease it. I can choose where do I want the particles to start, if I want them to start in a sphere or in a rectangle or a box or something like that. But for now, I'm going to start as a torus. Also, I'm going to add some movement to the particles, because in this case I don't want the particles to be static, so I could create some random velocity, which means that particles are going to move on a random direction with a random velocity. And also I can use audio modifiers, and audio modifiers allow me to apply almost like this kind of random audio effect on each particle, and each particle will sound slightly different from all the other particles. And you have things like random gains, random delays, random filters, granular synthesis, or eventually pitch shifters, random pitch shifters on each particle. So there is several things that you can do. I'm going to start by creating a random gain, and I'm going to create also random delays, because by default all particles start at the same time on a particle group, but I want to create random delays, which means that the particle will start appearing within the first 5 seconds. So essentially, instead of having everything playing at the same time, essentially things are going to start playing and moving around. So essentially, let's reduce this, because I don't need this huge number of particles. So let's decrease for 40 particles, and you have several sound sources, several particles moving around with this kind of sounds that I'm using, like so the idea here is to create some kind of a sci-fi kind of scene or something like that. So let's start, let's render. It's important because you always need to render your scene to capture it. So essentially you can play it and see what is happening in terms of visually the movement of the particles, but you really need to render to get the audio, and that's what you're going to do now. So let's render it, and then the engine will render all of this sound, all of these particles, almost like these virtual audio tracks are going to be rendered regarding the virtual microphone. So let's hear the result. Okay, so we have this example. For instance, imagine that you more or less like the kind of sound, but you want something slightly different. Eventually, one of the things that you can do is simply press this recreate button, and each time that you press this button, this will create a new set of particles with new parameters, which means that you can render this and end up having a different render, almost like a different take on the same scene. So for instance, let's render a new example. Okay, so you have all of these things that you can try. Also, you can go to the virtual microphone and eventually change this from stereo to multi-channel, like 5.1 or something like that. And in the end, imagine that you have rendered and you like the results, and then you want to use this in your Pro Tools session or something like that. So essentially, what you do, you simply export audio, and then we're going to export this microphone as a virtual, as a audio. For instance, I have here sci-fi scene, so let's save it, and then you can use this audio material in your other software like Pro Tools or something else. So I hope this gives you a slight overview of the things that you can do in terms of sound design with the software. In the other video tutorials, I'm going to talk a little more about additional things of the software. I hope you enjoyed.